Since he lost the Prime Ministership 2 weeks ago, Tony Abbott's moved out of Kirribilli, gone surfing and volunteered with his local firefighting brigade. And no, he doesn't rate time out to smell the roses.
I've never been someone who wanted to just hang around and smell the roses, I've got to say, Ray. That's never been my idea of a day well spent.
At his last media conference as Prime Minister, Mr Abbott promised no sniping or wrecking from the sidelines.
My pledge today is to make this change as easy as I can.
Good to see you, buddy. All right?
Yeah, no, I'm fine, mate. I'm fine.
But in setting the record straight during a half-hour interview this morning, Mr Abbott offered a key thought that will prove thorny for the Liberals.
And the interesting thing is that no policy has changed since the change of Prime Minister.
Well, I thought it was quite telling that Tony thinks nothing's changed, and certainly he was pretty open about the disunity and division inside the Liberal Party.
It's no secret that I'm somewhat of a Tony Abbott fan. His views and my views on certain subjects align. But the stance that he took today, many other leaders would be wanting to spit venom at people, and here he was telling the Liberal Party to unite. So I think that, it just shows the character of the bloke.
Mr Abbott insists he could have won the next federal election as the party's leader, even with his poor personal polling, pointing to David Cameron's experience earlier this year in winning the British general election, despite bad polls.
The entire time, absolutely the entire 5 years, they were behind in the polls, and then they had really quite a convincing victory. And I am confident that had I continued at the head of the government, that's exactly what we would have had.
The new member for Canning.
Tony Abbott's dumping occurred just before the West Australian Canning by-election. Turnbull supporters argued it was necessary to ditch Mr Abbott to keep the seat from falling to Labor. Rubbish, says Mr Abbott. He claims the seat was never in danger.
The Liberal Party's internal polling the weekend before the Canning by-election was that we were going to end up with 57% of the two-party preferred vote. One of the reasons why the ballot had to be brought on the week it was brought on by the proponents of a ballot was because a strong result in Canning, which is what we were going to get, would have put paid to this notion that somehow I was unelectable because of the polls. The interesting thing, Ray, is that if you judge things by the polls, I've never been very popular.
Yet his unpopularity was the prime reason for his removal. But Ray Hadley, the go-to shock jock for Sydney-based Liberal MPs, didn't ask about that in what could almost have been a fireside chat.
Not the budgie sparklers, please.
It was a stark contrast to Scott Morrison's encounter a week and a half ago, where he took along a hard hat.
One of Tony Abbott's great strengths is his loyalty, and I didn't understand why he wanted me to pick a fight with Joe Hockey and throw him under a bus.
It's probably a bit counterproductive to revisit all of this now. The last thing I want, Ray, to come out of this interview is a headline, Abbott slams Morrison.
I said on Friday to the Prime Minister's office that I thought things were pretty febrile and they should be on high alert.
Look, certainly there was a conversation, as I understand it, between Scott and Peter Credlin. He's obviously put one construction on the conversation. My office put a different construction on the conversation.
The member for Warringah also challenged the idea that he could have saved his prime ministerial skin if he'd sacked Joe Hockey from Treasury or removed his Chief of Staff, Peter Credlin.
When someone is absolutely focused on a particular objective, they're not going to be put off if they're thrown a few human sacrifices, as it were. And frankly, it's wrong to feed this particular beast.
Mr Abbott says at 57 he's too young to retire and he hasn't made a decision on staying or quitting Parliament and won't before Christmas. While the former Prime Minister is still clearly unhappy with the coup, he's warned coalition supporters to get behind Malcolm Turnbull, saying the alternative is a Labor government.
Even if they have to do it through gritted teeth, support the coalition, support the Prime Minister, support the government.
Look, it doesn't matter whether I'm gritting my teeth or not. Malcolm's the leader, what can we do?
Nationals MP George Christensen didn't have a vote in the spill, but he warns major policy changes against his electorate's interests won't be tolerated now. And he cites the government's planned crackdown to stop environment groups legally challenging large developments in court as an example.
There's been rumours that we might jettison that policy and that legislation. I think that would be a bad way to go because that's been through the party room and the party room's agreed to it. And quite frankly, I couldn't stand idly by if we decided to can that legislation. I'd be introducing my own private member's bill, but we'll wait and see what happens.
It's true there haven't been major policy changes under Malcolm Turnbull, but remember, this is week 3 and he's promised a return to traditional cabinet government, which means consultation before policy decisions, not captain's picks. Ministers who backed Mr Abbott in the spill believe change is coming.
Of course, you'd expect there to be a lot of continuity, but then, I suspect that moving forward, there'll be a different approach in relation to a range of issues.
And there'll be a different approach within the government as the Nats and Libs work out their new partnership under a different leader. But there's no way the Nats will tolerate any shift from current climate change policy.
Well, I can't divulge what goes on in the National Party room, but put it this way, if you strike an agreement and the agreement's broken, then the deal's off. Malcolm's views and my views, well, I suppose that I'm certainly a solid Conservative and he's a fairly solid little Liberal, so there's a bit of a divergence there, but the Liberal Party's a big tent and the Coalition's an even bigger tent.